Sussexes on their pretend royal tour of Australia.
Health? What? Community resilience and support for veterans and their families alongside private meetings.
A commercial flight, and your first stop was to go to the children's hospital and touch them?
Just 4 words, 4 quiet, almost invisible words, but the kind that don't just slip out, they reveal everything. Because what was whispered outside those hospital doors didn't just echo in a hallway, it exposed a mindset, a pattern, a truth hiding in plain sight. Let's make this quick. Not a headline, not a rumor, a moment. And moments like that, they don't lie. They slip through the cracks of performance, through the polished smiles and staged compassion, and land exactly where they were never meant to be heard, right in front of us. And suddenly, everything that followed starts to feel different. The smiles, slightly too timed. The gestures, slightly too measured. The warmth, just a little too convenient, because once you hear those 4 words, you can't unhear them. They sit there quietly reshaping everything you're about to see. Every handshake, every glance, every second spent inside that hospital becomes a question. Was it real or was it rushed?
You can see children in hospital and cut ribbons and open libraries and do what royals do.
Because here's where it gets uncomfortable. This wasn't speculation floating online. This wasn't distant gossip stitched together from assumptions. This came from someone inside. Someone who watched it unfold before a single camera angle was chosen, before the narrative was crafted, before the world was told what to think. And what they saw didn't match the image that was later sold. Think about that setting for a second. A children's hospital, not a stage, not a controlled environment, a place where pain is real, where time moves differently, where every minute matters in ways most people can't even begin to understand. And standing right outside those doors, those 4 words. Let's make this quick. Quick, in a place where families cling to seconds, where children fight battles they never signed up for, and suddenly the contrast begins to sting, because history has shown us something very different. Real compassion doesn't rush. It doesn't calculate seconds. It doesn't measure moments based on convenience. It stays. It lingers. It listens. It bends time instead of trying to escape it. And that's where the comparison quietly creeps in. Not forced, not exaggerated, just naturally unavoidable. Because when you've seen what genuine care looks like, anything less doesn't just feel different, it feels wrong. Now step inside that hospital. Picture it clearly. Not chaos, not spontaneity, but arrangement. Organization. A setup that feels less like a visit and more like a sequence. Around 70 people gathered. Staff, parents, visitors, and among them, children who should have been resting. Children in treatment. Children pulled out of rooms where they belonged and placed into a space where they could be seen. Why? That's the question that doesn't sit still. Because these weren't children having a good day. These weren't kids waiting for a cheerful surprise. These were patients. Some fragile, some exhausted, some fighting things most adults wouldn't survive. And yet there they were, lined up, waiting, not for care, but for a moment. 6 or 7 seconds. Let that sink in. 6 or 7 seconds per child. A smile, a glance, a quick interaction, and then movement. On to the next, like a sequence ticking forward. Efficient, controlled, quick. But here's the thing no one can choreograph: the reaction, the faces, the eyes. Because children don't perform, they don't filter, they don't adjust their emotions for optics. And what they showed wasn't excitement, it wasn't joy. It was something quieter, something heavier, discomfort, confusion, a silent question hanging in the air: why am I here? One child in particular, pale, visibly unwell, clearly out of place, not engaged, not uplifted, just enduring. That image doesn't disappear once you notice it. It lingers because it wasn't supposed to be seen that way. It wasn't part of the narrative, but it slipped through anyway. And that's when the bigger picture begins to form. Because this wasn't just about a single visit. It wasn't just about one moment that felt off. It was about a pattern quietly stitching itself together. A pattern where the environment bends to the moment instead of the moment adapting to the environment. And the reactions? They didn't stay quiet. Voices started rising, not in chaos, but in clarity. People who've seen these situations before. People who understand what it means to sit beside a hospital bed, to hold a hand that's weaker than it should be, to measure time not in minutes but in meaning. And what they saw didn't align with what they know is right. Because when something feels staged in a place that should never be staged, it hits differently. And the most unsettling part? The cameras were there the whole time, watching, recording, capturing everything exactly as it happened. No edits in the moment, no filters on reality, just raw footage, quiet quietly holding the truth, waiting for someone to notice. And now that we have, the question isn't what happened. The question is, why did it happen that way? And more importantly, what does it reveal about everything else we haven't questioned yet? Because once you start pulling on that thread, it doesn't stop at the hospital doors, it follows her. It follows every step, every smile, every carefully timed moment that came after. And suddenly, what looked like separate events start to connect. Patterns don't announce themselves loudly. They whisper, they repeat, and if you're paying attention, they reveal far more than any statement ever could. Just 1 hour, that's all it took. 1 hour after those children were lined up, after those 6 or 7 seconds per child, after those faces said what no press release ever will, everything shifted. New location, new energy, new tone. And suddenly, there was time. Plenty of it. The same woman who wanted to make it quick now seemed completely unhurried, relaxed, engaged, present, but not in the hospital, not with those children, somewhere else entirely. And the cameras? Still right there. Because here's where the contrast becomes impossible to ignore. In a women's refuge, a place that deserves real attention, real depth, real presence, there she was, smiling, interacting, speaking freely, serving food, laughing, asking the room, is anyone else hungry? And not quietly, not intimately, but outwardly. To the room, to the cameras, to the moment being captured. And suddenly, you have to ask, where did the urgency go? Where did the need to be quick disappear to? Because time didn't run out. It shifted. And then came another moment, smaller on the surface, but just as telling underneath. A simple question asked politely. How would you like to be addressed? Now think about that carefully, because titles matter in certain circles. They carry weight. They define presence. And yet, in that moment, with cameras watching, with headlines waiting to be written, the answer came effortlessly, call me Meg. Simple, relatable, perfectly packaged. And the headlines followed exactly as expected. Warm, down to earth, genuine. But here's the thing about authenticity. It doesn't switch on when the cameras do. It doesn't appear when it's convenient and disappear when it's not. And that's where the discomfort returns. Because you've already heard the 4 words, and they don't match this version. Then suddenly, the narrative tries to pivot. A new story enters the room. Security concerns, press interference, claims that journalists had somehow complicated arrangements, put things at risk. And for a moment, it almost works. Almost. Because it's loud. It's dramatic. It pulls attention away from something else. But not quite far enough. Because people weren't focused on that. They weren't debating security logistics. They were still thinking about the children. About that lineup. About those seconds. Because some images don't fade just because a new headline appears. They stay. They sit in the back of your mind, quietly refusing to be replaced. And then something even more unsettling begins to surface. Not confirmed, not declared as fact, but circulating, growing. A quiet possibility that raises more questions than answers. Because while all of this was unfolding, while the tour continued, while moments were being captured and shared, someone was seen somewhere else. Not casually, not coincidentally, but deliberately. Observing, preparing, a location tied to something tragic, something sensitive, and suddenly the question becomes impossible to ignore. Is this another stop, another moment waiting to be shaped, another setting where presence could be captured regardless of what it represents? Because if it is, what does that say? What does it say about boundaries, about awareness, about the difference between showing up and understanding where you are? And this is where the voices that know this world best start to sound different. Not louder, but sharper, more certain, because they've seen patterns like this before. They've watched how things unfold when intention and image begin to blur together, when moments aren't just experienced, but used. And one voice in particular cuts straight through everything else. Not emotional, not exaggerated, just clear, direct, saying what others hesitate to say out loud, that children feel it. They always feel it. When something is real and when it isn't. And once that idea settles in, everything changes again, because you go back, you replay those moments, you look at those faces one more time, and you start to notice things you didn't catch the first time. The hesitation, the distance, the absence of connection that no amount of smiling can hide. And suddenly, it's not about what was said, it's about what was felt, because that's the part you can't rehearse. That's the part no one can control. And then there's him, standing there, present, watching everything unfold, saying nothing, doing nothing, And that silence, it speaks louder than anything else in this entire story. Because silence in moments like that isn't neutral. It's a choice. And that choice becomes part of the pattern too. And here's where it all circles back. Not to the hospital, not to the refuge, not to the museum, but to those 4 words. Because they weren't just a moment, they were a key. A glimpse into something deeper. Something consistent. Something that doesn't rely on interpretation once you've seen it clearly enough. Let's make this quick. 4 words that don't belong in a place like that. 4 words that don't align with everything that came after. 4 words that quietly unravel the entire performance thread by thread until what's left isn't confusion anymore, it's clarity. And the most unsettling part? This story isn't finished. The tour continues. More stops, more moments, more cameras, more opportunities for the same pattern to repeat or evolve. Because once something like this surfaces, it doesn't disappear. It lingers. It builds. It waits for the next moment to reveal itself again. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, one image refuses to fade. Not a headline, not a statement. A child sitting there, tired, uncomfortable, wanting to be anywhere else but in that moment. That image doesn't need explanation. It doesn't need commentary. It speaks on its own. Everything else around it, that's just noise trying to catch up.